And good morning. Welcome. Happy spring is right around the corner. And whenever the time changes, that's usually a precursor. I remember when I was a kid, my mother would often say, well, we're losing an hour tonight. And I could never quite figure out which hour and where it went. So I would ponder that, and I would go to my mother and say, I'm concerned about this, losing this hour. And maybe one when I did my homework and I don't want to lose it. She says, well, don't worry about it. You'll get it back in the fall. So I just envisioned, doing whatever I was doing, let's say my homework. Suddenly it disappears. That whole hour's gone. I'm not sure what I'm going to tell my teacher. But then come the fall, here comes my homework falling out of the sky. Mom was right. The hour did come back. So, yeah, it always is an opportunity for me to point out the relativity and the arbitrariness of what we call time. Obviously, time doesn't change. Simply our way of keeping track of it changes. Very often we get those two fused together, and we don't know the difference between the present moment and the movement on the clock. Those are two different things. We can experience the present moment no matter what time it is. You could call it anything, and it's still the present moment. So the title of our talk is Remembering Who You Truly Are, and that is the title of a book that I had just written that we'll talk a little bit about after the second service for those of you that are available. Who am I? That's the key question. There are some practices where that's the entire practice, is to simply ask that question again and again. Who am I? I remember years ago attending a retreat at the Cloud Mountain Retreat Center in Washington State, very beautiful place. It was a week-long retreat, and the whole retreat was focused on the question of who am I? The instruction was to constantly repeat that question, either to yourself, or we would get together with a partner and we would repeat it with each other. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you really? Who are you truly? Tell me who you really are. Over and over again. Challenging but very powerful experience. When I began the retreat, I sat down and closed my eyes, breathed, and dutifully asked the question for the first time, who am I? And this quiet little voice came up from, seemed like somewhere around in here, and it said, who wants to know? And this is going to be harder than I thought. There's a squatter moved in when I wasn't looking. So I discovered at that retreat that there were many me's, many little parts of myself in there. In the work of psychosynthesis, they call it subpersonalities. And Gurdjieff, in the Gurdjieff work, he referred to them as the various I's, capital I, I's. Recognizing that at the human level, at the level of the personality, we are not a singular, congruent, coherent self. We are a collage of people, little people that have been created, typically early in our childhood, for specific purposes. So the ego is really not a monolithic structure. It's a structure, you could think of it almost as a structure, but it's filled full of these little selves, little beings, kind of like an app. It's almost like we have all these apps inside of ourselves. If you have an app on your phone, an app is a program written for a specific purpose. That's what these subpersonalities are. They're like little apps inside of us. So if you can imagine going to the app store, the psychological app store, okay? And you're reviewing the apps and you run across one that says, this app was written by a 3-year-old child for the purpose of getting her mother's approval. It's been used 100,000 times and is occasionally successful. P.S. You don't need to buy this app, you already own it. P.P.S. It's running right now. So we have these little people inside of us that are trying to get mom's attention, trying to get dad's approval, trying to be stronger than brother or sister or smarter than brother and sister, and all the different things that we deal with as a child, struggling to grow up in our family. We find we have needs, the need for safety, the need for love and approval, the need to belong, the need for self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera. And in different family systems, there's different strategies you need to get those needs met, or at least we see it that way. You see, maybe one family or one person says, I only get my parents' approval if I get good grades, or if I excel at something, then I'm recognized. So I have this app that says you always have to win. You always have to be the best. You always have to succeed. Otherwise, you're not worthy of love. Or another app says that you have to be smart, or you have to be strong, you have to be pretty, you have to take care of other people, you have to do things perfectly, et cetera, et cetera. You have to be in control. You have to be funny. And so all these little strategies we create, and they're running inside of us, and they are not bad. It's just that they're terribly outdated, you see. It's like our life is being run by a group of 3- and 4-year-olds, and we project this into the world, making it very serious and making it about the world, not about what's going on inside of us. These subpersonalities typically run unconsciously. We're not aware of them. And so the work, as you might guess what I'm going to say, the work is to become aware of them, to notice them when they fire up. Notice when those apps appear. Because the work is to become whole, complete, recognize that we have access to all parts of ourself. That's our work at the first stage of the journey. To be at peace with ourselves. And, there's a little limerick that I can tell. I checked it out with Victor, and he said it was okay to tell in church. Little Limerick says, within this temple, there's a crowd. There's one of us that's humble. There's one that's proud. One is repentant for his sins. Another just sits and grins. From how much trouble I could be if I only knew which one was me. And the answer is neither, yet all of them are. None of them are really you, and yet you're responsible for them. So it's like educating all of these parts of ourselves that have been taught ways of being that were probably quite appropriate in our childhood. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it. It seemed to work. We survived somehow. The problem is the world is not like our family. And reality is not the way we believed it was when we were 3 or 4 years old. So we may still be playing these apps, trying to get mommy or daddy's attention or trying to be worthy of being loved or whatever you say. So the work is to recognize the subpersonality, recognize when we are attached to something, when we keep trying and don't succeed, when we feel frustrated. Typically in these subpersonalities, we feel like a child. We may not recognize that, but we feel powerless. Often we feel like a victim. And a lot of times these things kick in. You know, you have a change in leadership in government, and all of a sudden, people are feeling things they weren't feeling before, and it kicks in all the response. But that response is coming typically from a 4 or 5-year-old child, not from a 40 or 50-year-old adult. So the work is to recognize this, recognize when we are caught up in this subpersonality, when we're identified with it, when we feel stuck, when we feel helpless, when we feel like we're a child maybe, victim, deficient, powerless, because that's what generates the gap, if you will, the subpersonality. You know, here I am 3 years old, I don't feel loved, and I need mom's attention. Well, I'll do whatever the heck I have to do to get it. So, but that depends on what family I'm in, who my parents are. Mom may not give a darn whether or not how smart I am, but it's whether or not I take care of her or I take care of the family or I'm nice or good. So very quickly we determine what we have to do to get what we need. There's a story about this is actually a true story. After World War II, 6 months to a year after World War II, some military engineers were building something on one of the Japanese islands. There was a battle site earlier, and suddenly somebody started shooting at them. They discovered it was a Japanese machine gunner who was still holed up in a machine gun nest. He didn't know the war was over. And of course, they couldn't convince him it was over because he spoke Japanese, he didn't speak English. They got an interpreter, he wouldn't believe the interpreter. So finally, the only thing they could do was to get his former commanding officer. and his commanding officer came and said, "Hey, buddy, the war's over. You can quit." And so they took him home, and he was acknowledged as a war hero. But that's kind of the way things are with us, you know. We have these parts of ourselves that are fighting battles that were long over. We're fighting what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. And so these contaminate our functioning as adults. We don't see things as they are. We see things as they were, or rather as we thought they were. So we see it through a very distorted perspective. So the work is just to be aware of these and to allow them to be without acting out. So in other words, if I'm feeling lonely and I need mom's attention, quote unquote, rather than trying to act that out unconsciously, I just sit with that experience. Feel the sadness of feeling unloved, feeling lonely, feeling a 3-year-old child who is powerless. And as I allow myself to feel those feelings and to not get attached to the story around them, then that's the healing that takes place. So it's not easy, it's painful sometimes to face these. But if we're willing to do it, if we can be present and say, okay, that's what I've been doing to get to feel loved. I have to be smart, or I have to be funny, or I have to be perfect, or whatever it is, you say. When I let that go, I will feel the pain of the little child. But when I feel it consciously in my body, when I breathe into it, then it's gone. Then that particular part is, you might say, integrated into who I really am. So that my adult self, my full conscious here and now personality can deal with things as they are, not as the way they were. It's very empowering when we do this. But we feel powerless first because we're caught up in the child's story. So recognizing, okay, this is an app running. Looking at, well, okay, what's this purpose does this serve? What's the pain that it has? Feeling, talking to it, maybe even like we would to a little child. It's okay. You don't have to do that to be loved. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You know, giving ourselves what we feel like we didn't get when we were little. That begins to coalesce the personality in a more whole and healthy way. We become more fully functional rather than having a whole bunch of little people inside of us fighting with each other. A very common subpersonality is the judge. We all have that in various ways. You're not doing it right. You're not good enough. Your brother could do it better, or whatever you say. So when you notice the judge, we can either buy into that story, or we can see that that's a subpersonality. What's it trying to do for us? Well, I don't know. We'd have to explore that. But typically, the judge is trying to make us feel safe. You know, if only you were smarter. Well, why do I need to be smarter? Because I feel loved when I feel smarter. But when I grow up, this subpersonality, I realize that I don't have to go through that the love comes from within me. I'm no longer a 3-year-old trying to get it from from my mother or dad, you see. Now, as it turns out, this is powerful psychological work, but it's really not what we're here for completely. We are here to realize who we really are, and who we really are is much more than the personality. The paradox is that the personality needs to come to a certain degree of wholeness and health, and as that happens, then we ripen into the next stage of our journey. It's like the fruit must ripen and then it falls off the tree. So in order to know that I'm not who I think I am, I must look at that part of myself that does think, this is me, this mistaken me, you see. But once we come into a feeling of wholeness, a sense of functionality, then ironically, that's when we go beyond it. It's like the body. When we're healthy, we don't think about the body that much. If we're sick or in pain, then we're very much aware of the body. So it's the same way with the personality. It's like when the personality is whole, fully functional, it becomes invisible. We're no longer identified by it, you see. So who am I truly? We come into the practice of the Dharma. And the Dharma is very different than what we were doing before, because with the Dharma, we let go of all concepts. Even the concept of self. We let go of the concept of I'm doing something, or I'm trying to get somewhere. You are no longer doing the work when we get to this place. You are simply making yourself available for the universe to work on you. That's the work of discovering who we truly are. Moment by moment, we look at all of the ways that we're still attached to a sense of me, to a sense of this is the way I should be, to feeling deficient or feeling proud or whatever you say. Because the ego always operates through comparison. I'm less than, better than, taller than, shorter than, younger, older, whatever you say. That's the way the ego operates. When we're working with the Dharma, there's just awareness. So the quote I'd like to leave you with is this one from Nisargadatta Maharaj, who's an Indian sage. He says, instead of searching for what you do not have, discover that which can never be lost. Say that's the sub-personality, the inner child, feels it does not have what it needs, so it goes out to the world, mom, dad, family, to get what it needs. Nisargadatta is saying, instead of searching outward for what we believe we don't have, discover that part of us that cannot be lost, that cannot be unloved, that cannot be anything but whole, present, because that's what we really are, you see. So I want to make a quick announcement here. I apologize, I'm running a little bit late. After the second service at 11:45 approximately, if you do want to come back, I hope some of you do, we're going to have a little bit of a reception downstairs and celebrate the publication of my 5th book. It's a very different kind of book. It's an electronic book. It's an evolving book. It's an alive book. It's not your grandpa's book, as they say. And so the publishers who live in Germany will be here for the second service, and they will be here afterwards to talk about it. And I'll talk a little bit about it as well. So hoping you can make it, and if not, that's perfectly okay. There are cards out on the table there with the name of the book and little instructions as to how you can access it. So the book's free, by the way. It's a gift to the world, and I'll just leave it at that. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for doing the